What if a simple gesture had the power to change not only the course of a single life, but the spiritual destiny of all humanity? In the quietest moments of history, where words are absent, movements speak, Christ, more than a master of the word, was a master of the body. His gestures were maps, invisible directions to a world that few saw, but many felt. While most cling to what he said, few understand what he showed with his hands, with his eyes, with his feet. And it is precisely in this silence of movement where one of the greatest mysteries of the divine mission resides. History has always highlighted Christ's speeches, his parables, his visible miracles. However, behind each word there was a vibration, and behind each vibration, a gesture, a tilt of the head, a lift of the eyes, an extension of the hands. In all these actions, Christ encoded energies that activated portals, not merely symbolic, but real, spiritual, interdimensional. In many ancient cultures, such as ancient Egypt, Vedic India, or Celtic rituals, gestures have always been considered keys to open sacred passages. So, why would it be different in the presence of the Son of Man? Christ did not express himself merely with words. He used his entire being as an instrument. His language was full, incorporating the invisible into the visible. The sacred gesture was not just an external manifestation, but a resonance that traversed layers of reality. The raised hand, the silence amid chaos, the way he shared bread or touched the sick, all these gestures created alterations in the energy fabric of space and time. Where he acted, something opened. Where he remained, something rose. Where he touched, something was reborn. It is necessary to understand that the body of Christ was not an ordinary body. Its vibrational constitution was tuned to a frequency beyond ordinary matter. When he gestured, he was not only communicating with the humans around him, but also with cosmic forces, with celestial entities, with invisible structures that govern creation. Each gesture was a summons, each movement an activation. He knew what he was doing. He knew the codes. And for this reason, every little gesture of his carries a potency that still reverberates in the higher planes today. In the esoteric tradition, there is an understanding that the body is a temple, and in a temple, every gesture is a ritual. Christ utilized this principle in its purest essence. Every step, every glance, every silence was a cosmic liturgy. When he healed with his hands, he was not just healing, he was opening frequencies. When he walked among crowds, he was not just walking, he was sowing fields of light. When he remained silent in the face of provocation, it was not passivity, it was energetic mastery. The sacred gesture is, therefore, the manifestation of the invisible through form. Interestingly, even in the sacred texts that have reached us, there are subtle records of this body language. The Gospel, although veiled, preserves precious fragments. He lifted his eyes to heaven and prayed. He extended his hand and touched. He knelt. He remained silent. In each of these fragments, there is the code. What the gesture means, what it activates, what it communicates beyond human sight. And that's why studying these movements is not just revisiting history, it's reopening portals that remain active for those who know how to access them. The sacred gesture is much more than a physical expression. It is an encoded vibration, a field that is activated by pure intention, aligned with the heart and with divine origin. Christ mastered this subtle science. Throughout his mission, he used gestures to communicate truths that words could not contain, revelations that can only be understood by those who see with the eyes of the soul. Therefore, understanding this language is to delve into a deeper level of the Christic message, far beyond the letter and the sound. But for a gesture to have this power, it must emerge from a pure place. Christ did not perform, he expressed. And this difference is crucial. The gesture that opens portals is not theatrical. It does not seek attention. It emanates from a direct connection with the divine. It is an extension of inner truth, an overflow of the Spirit. When he touched someone, he did not just make a physical movement. He offered an energetic permission, an authorization for transformation to occur. This language, although mysterious, is not inaccessible. Even today, there are wise people and spiritual practitioners who connect with these codes through meditation, fasting, prayer, and conscious practice. By studying the gestures of Christ, we are also invited to refine our own. How we walk, how we touch, how we look. Everything communicates, everything vibrates. Everything can be a sacred gesture or an empty distraction. The choice lies in how we inhabit our body and what intention we nourish each action with. Throughout this guide, we will traverse the key moments of the Christic journey, revealing the actions that marked transitions, healings, openings, and miracles. We will analyze not only what was done, but what was activated, the symbolism, the vibration, the hidden impact of each movement, and most importantly, how these actions remain alive and accessible, because the portals he opened have not closed. They are here, and those who understand the signs will be able to cross them. Therefore, prepare yourself. This will not be just a historical journey. It will be a spiritual dive, an energetic reading of Christ's mission through the movements he made with his body, with the field, with the soul. We are about to enter a territory where the invisible rules, where gestures are keys, where silence speaks louder than 1,000 words, and where perhaps we may find the way back home. At the moment when Christ approaches the waters of the Jordan, something invisible stirs in the universe. This was not merely a symbolic scene, nor an act of religious formality. It was the beginning of a profound activation, the conscious opening of the first grand portal of his mission. When he bows before John the Baptist, he is not simply submitting to a ritual. He is realigning the body with the heavens, connecting the physical plane with the supreme will, using the gesture of surrender as a key to access the invisible. The lowering of the head in this context is the silent confirmation of a total surrender to the divine plan. There was no vanity, no superiority, only cosmic obedience and vibrational humility. Upon touching the waters, Christ consecrates the primordial element of creation as a means of transmutation. The water, laden with the ancestral memory of everything that has ever been, becomes a receptacle for the new Christic energy that descends into the world. The immersion itself is not just a symbol of purification, but a representation of the complete abandonment of the human self. Christ did not need to purify himself, but he submitted to the right to leave a code. The true master descends so that others may ascend. It is in this lowering of oneself, in this bodily gesture of humility, that he opens the first vortex of light in his public journey. The body, at this moment, becomes a bridge, and the gesture, a gateway. At the exact moment when Christ emerges from the water, the heavens open, and it is here that the relationship between gesture and spiritual response becomes evident. The lifting of the wet face, the eyes rising to the heavens, the deep breath that absorbs the moment, are movements synchronized with the higher plane. Christ's body was tuned to receive. He knew that by aligning his body, his mind, and his spirit with the source, something would come, and it did. A dove descends, but it is not just a bird, it is a code of light, an energetic form sent as a seal, as a response to the correct posture. The gesture of baptism does not end with the plunge, but with the energetic ascension of the being in alignment with the greater purpose. John the Baptist, at that very moment, recognizes the impact of that gesture. He himself is taken aback in the presence of the one who did not need to be baptized. But Christ's gesture, by not refusing, by not opposing, by not exalting himself, reveals a supreme truth. The body only becomes divine when it accepts to be an instrument. And by allowing himself to be touched by the consecrated water and the hands of the prophet, Christ activates within himself the first seal of the new covenant. The gesture of total acceptance is what transforms a common moment into a turning point in the earth's spiritual time. The surrender of the body causes the veil between the worlds to break. It is crucial to understand that the act of baptism is much more than an external ritual. It represents the preparation of the physical vessel to contain and transmit frequencies that cannot coexist with ego. When Christ bows, he deactivates any residue of the human personality that could hinder the flow of light. And when he rises, he is no longer just Jesus, the man. He is the activated Christ, the awakened channel, the conscious transmitter of a new vibration. All of this happens without a single word being spoken. The language there is different. It's the gesture that speaks. It's the body that prays. It's the water that sings. The nature there present also responds. The waters calm down. The air changes in density. There is a perceptible silence. The atmosphere around bends to the presence of something sacred. The elements recognize when a body is vibrating in unity with the whole. Therefore, at that moment, baptism becomes a cosmic ceremony, and all the actions performed, the calm walk to the river, the lowering of the head, the raising of the face, the lifting of the eyes, are the exact movements that open a rift in common reality. The sky manifests itself, not as an external spectacle, but as a vibrational response to the internal gesture. The symbolism of baptism, when understood from this perspective, reveals the hidden power of how a simple act, when done with full awareness, can rearrange invisible structures. Christ did not dramatize his surrender. He lived each moment with full presence. His body was the temple where the Holy Spirit would descend, and the gestures that preceded this descent were all tuned with divine precision. This is the secret. It's not about the gesture for its form, but for the frequency it carries. The body becomes an antenna, the gesture, transmission, the water, vehicle, and the response, inevitable. After baptism, Christ does not seek glory. He does not boast. He does not demand recognition. His next move is withdrawal. He retreats to the wilderness, where he will begin another sacred stage. But what is marked in this first public act is a deep reverence for the invisible. Everything that was done by him at that moment was done in silence, but with power. It is an eternal teaching. It is not the shouts that open the heavens, but the gesture of true humility. It is not the speeches that move the divine, but the frequency of total surrender. Genuine spirituality manifests itself in this way, in actions that do not seek applause, but transform atmospheres. Christ taught this with his body. He did not just speak about the kingdom of heaven, he embodied it, and each of his actions was an invocation, an invitation, an activation. Baptism, therefore, is more than a beginning. It is the vibrational foundation of your mission. It is the point where heaven touches earth through a man who has become a living gesture of light. It is the silent declaration that the Spirit is ready to dwell in those who truly know how to bow. This moment contains codes that can still be accessed today. As we revisit these gestures with the eyes of the soul, we activate forgotten memories. We are reminded that we too can align our bodies with the sky. We too can touch the waters with pure intention. We too can bow so that something greater may inhabit us. Christ did not come just to be worshipped. He came to show the way, step by step, gesture by gesture. And baptism was the first gateway he crossed, so that we all could cross it too. When Christ moves away from the Jordan and enters the arid sands of the desert, he is not merely physically withdrawing from the world. He embarks on an absolute plunge into the depths of the self, where there are no witnesses, no external voices, only the language of the soul and the temptations of the unseen. As he moves towards the void, Christ performs a sacred act of disconnecting from human noise. Each step taken towards the desert symbolizes a conscious distancing from the distractions of the world and a profound realignment with the eternal source. The gesture here is not in words, but in the choice to be alone. And to be alone, at this level of consciousness, is one of the greatest spiritual acts of resistance ever recorded in history. For 40 days and 40 nights, Christ does not communicate with anyone. Not a single word is spoken to men. He only speaks with silence. Silence, in this context, is the supreme gesture of control. It represents the non-reaction in the face of chaos, the complete mastery over the impulses of the body, mind, and emotion. By remaining in fasting and stillness, Christ moves the inner universe. The body begins to align with a new vibration, the mind quiets to listen to the frequency of the divine, and the spirit expands beyond form. The absence of words is a gesture as powerful as the manifestation of a miracle, for in silence the commands of the Most High are heard. It is in this territory of the soul, bare and dry like the desert itself, where dark forces arise. The temptations are not just external or figurative, but are thought forms, astral entities, dense patterns, seeking to reactivate the ego programming. And Christ, without physically moving, without raising his voice, without changing his expression, remains firm. Each non-action, each non-word, is a gesture of absolute power. It is the gesture of active silence. He does not react, does not argue with emotion, does not confront on the same plane. He rises, and with that, deactivates the influence. This is the gesture that no eye sees, but the entire cosmos recognizes. The temptations offered, power, food, dominion, are not just provocations, they are tests to verify the vibrational integrity of the body and consciousness. And what does Christ do? He maintains his stance. The slow breathing, the inward gaze, the quiet firmness. This ensemble creates an impenetrable energy field. The act of not moving, of not yielding, of not bowing to desire, becomes a vibrational shield. Each moment of persistence represents a wall built with presence. Christ did not need to resist with physical force. His gesture was subtle, but invincible. The light contained in his body expanded with every challenge overcome without reactivity. It is necessary to understand that this moment in the desert is not just a break. It is a spiritual battle of cosmic dimensions. And Christ wins without raising weapons, without uttering inflamed speeches, without resorting to external demonstrations. His weapon is the gesture of silence, the movement of conscious non-action. It is the purest expression of inner mastery, the upright posture, the controlled breathing, the gaze turned to the center. All of this composes an energetic language understood by higher dimensions. The earth falls silent, and the sky watches. The gesture of remaining, when everything around invites collapse, is one of the highest signs of spiritual mastery. When Satan offers him all the kingdoms of the world in exchange for a gesture of submission, Christ does not show anger, nor fear, nor hesitation. He stands firm and responds with a truth that cuts like a sword. You shall not tempt the Lord your God. But even before the word, the body had already communicated everything. The refusal was expressed in the vibration. The integrity was present in the steadiness of the gaze, in the unshakable posture. The words only came to confirm what was already energetically sealed. This is the power of the inner gesture. It precedes the word, and often makes its need unnecessary. At the end of the 40-day period, Christ does not emerge exhausted, broken, or humiliated. He emerges strengthened. His body was tempered by silence. His mind was purified by solitude. His energy field expanded with each temptation overcome without conflict. The absence of explosive gestures, the quietude in the face of provocation, the maintenance of posture, all of this created a magnetic field around him that would accompany him throughout his mission. It was the body of a man, but the vibration of a star. It was flesh, but also concentrated light. And this light was born from silent renunciation. This moment in the desert teaches us that the true sacred gesture is often invisible to the world's eyes. It's not the raised hand, the miraculous touch, the multiplication of bread. It's the endurance, the refusal to be contaminated, the refusal to give in. Christ shows us that there is a silent force that overcomes any scream, that there is an internal gesture capable of moving worlds without moving a muscle, that there is a sacred language written in silence, deciphered only by those who have learned to listen with their heart. Upon returning from the desert, Christ is no longer the same. There's a new sparkle in his eyes, an unwavering firmness in his presence. His body now carries the codes of sacred silence. And this changes everything. The public mission can begin, for the temple has been purified, the field has been shielded, the consciousness has been set. He returns to human society not to win debates, but to move atmospheres with his presence. His most impactful gesture up until now was invisible, to resist without resisting. And this gesture activated a portal that definitively connected him to the divine plan, sealing his journey with spiritual authority. This portal remains active. It opens every time someone, faced with temptation, chooses conscious silence. It activates every time a soul, even amidst chaos, chooses to remain in integrity. Christ showed us with body and spirit that true resistance is not loud. It is firm, subtle, and inviolable. In the desert, he didn't need to do, he just was. And this being, in its purest state, transformed the space around. The gesture of silence is still one of the greatest keys to navigate through life's deserts. Amidst the crowds that surrounded him with hope and despair, Christ walked with a serenity that contrasted with the agitation of those seeking healing. But what few realized was that, before any word was spoken, before any visible miracle manifested, a gesture was already being prepared. Christ's hand, extended over the sick, was not just an act of compassion. It was the emanation of a very high vibrational field that pierced the flesh and restored the spirit. The touch, in this context, was a vector of the eternal, a point of contact between the divine source and the wounded body. And more than that, it was a transfer of reality. Christ did not heal with external techniques or material instruments. He used gesture, the body, the gaze, the presence, and the most powerful among them was the touch. When his hand touched, it was not merely skin to skin, it was light with density, it was spirit with matter. This touch carried the purest intention, the desire to restore what had been forgotten, to realign what had been corrupted, to awaken what was asleep. Healing was not an isolated event, it was a return to the origin, activated by the sacred gesture of the conscious hand. And this hand, guided by a non-judgmental heart, was a direct channel of the energy of the Most High. There are records of instant healings with just a light touch, a brief contact. Sometimes just the nearby presence was enough. But why did this simple gesture cause such a transformation? Because Christ's hand was not only connected to the physical body, it was an extension of his divine essence, a living bridge between planes. When he touched, his intention transcended time, pain, trauma. He directly accessed the person's original field, the one that existed before the illness. And there, at the point where the pain had settled, he reinstalled the frequency of health through the pure and present gesture. The cure, therefore, did not depend solely on the physical act. It was the gesture of total consciousness. Even before touching, Christ felt. He connected with the suffering of others as if it were his own, dissolving the ego that separates and merging with the needs of others. This created a unified field of love where the separation between healer and healed ceased to exist. The gesture of touch was merely the materialization of this unity. It was not a divine concession, but a reactivation of what had always been available but had been forgotten. Christ reminded with a touch who the person truly was, whole, fulfilled, healthy. It's interesting to note that the gesture of touch did not always originate from him. In some passages, like the case of the woman with the issue of blood, it was her touch that initiated the process. But even there, the gesture was everything. Her faith was expressed in the movement of reaching out and touching the hem of the garment. And Christ, upon feeling the energy leave him, did not react with surprise, but with recognition. Someone touched me. I felt power go out from me. Here the gesture becomes a two-way street. The touch is both response and cause. It is intention in action. It is the moment when the invisible condenses and manifests. In the tradition of the Gospels, there are countless accounts of healings where the gesture of the hand is described with precision. He laid his hands, touched the eyes, took by the hand, touched the tongue, put his fingers in the ears. These details are not random. They indicate that Christ used the body with subtle science, knowing exactly where and how to release the blockages. Each movement was precise. Each touch had purpose. He knew that the human body responds to vibrational commands, and that the gesture, when made with pure intention and full consciousness, instantly reprograms the tissues, the systems, the energy field. But it wasn't just the physical body that received healing. Christ's gesture transcended dimensions. The one who was touched was also forgiven, purified, liberated. Often, before the touch, he would say, "Your sins are forgiven." because he knew that the root of the disease lay in the emotional, spiritual realm, in the invisible pacts of pain and guilt. The gesture of the hand came later, as a visible confirmation of what had already been done in the invisible. This order is fundamental. The gesture sealed what the word had released, and the touch transformed into body what had already been restored in the soul. There is a mystical depth to the gesture of Christ's hands. His hands symbolize the balance between giving and receiving, between action and contemplation. By extending them, he offered everything. By touching others with them, he dissolved the veil of separation. And when he raised his hands to the sky, he became the perfect channel between earth and the Father. The hand gesture, in all these expressions, was a sacred dance of communion. They not only conveyed healing, they taught how to connect with life in its purest form. Therefore, many who merely observed him, even without being touched, felt the transformation occur. In today's world, few spiritual practices understand the real power of conscious touch. The gesture has become mechanical, empty, disconnected from intention. But Christ showed us another way. The healing hand gesture only works when it comes from total presence, when the heart is in absolute compassion, when there is no ego, no rush, no desire for control, just love in motion. And when this happens, there is no limit to what can be restored. The body responds, the soul flourishes, the spirit rises, the gesture heals, not because it is technical, but because it is true. The memory of that gesture remains alive. It is imprinted on the field of the earth. It is recorded in the hearts that still seek true healing. Each time someone reaches out with purity, this gesture is reactivated. Each time a human being touches another with the intention of freeing, not controlling, the gesture of Christ manifests once again. Because he came not only to heal the bodies of his time, he came to leave a trail of gestures that continue to open portals, and the touch was, and still is, one of the most potent among them. When Christ healed, he did not merely remove the disease. He restored the person's divine identity. His gesture dissolved layers of fear, guilt, and limitation, and in their place, he restored the original light. There was no merit, there was no condition, only presence. The act of healing is, therefore, an act of remembrance. Christ did not impose healing, he revealed what was always there, waiting to be reactivated. And his hand, extended with love and power, remains one of the purest expressions of the divine on earth. Among the many gestures of Christ that transformed visible reality, few carry as much symbolic density and energetic potency as the act of sharing bread. This gesture, which at first glance seems simple, carries within it deep layers of universal wisdom. It represents not only the generosity of feeding the hungry, but the direct manifestation of an abundance field activated by pure consciousness. When Christ lifts his eyes to heaven, holds the bread with reverence, and breaks it with intention, he is not only distributing physical food, he opens a vortex of energy that expands everything around him. The multiplication of the loaves was not an isolated miracle, but a natural response to a gesture that resonated in tune with the intelligence of the universe. The most powerful detail of this moment lies in the order of the gestures. He looks up, gives thanks, breaks, and gives. This cycle is not random. Each movement is a code. The gaze to the sky represents a direct connection with the source. Gratitude activates the frequency of abundance. Breaking symbolizes the shattering of the illusion of scarcity. And giving is the flow of shared energy. In this cycle, Christ teaches us that multiplication does not depend on the initial quantity, but on the vibration that permeates the gesture. He didn't ask for more bread. He didn't question the limitation. He didn't worry about the math of scarcity. He simply connected with the field of creation and allowed this field to flow through the gesture. It is essential to note that bread, as a symbol, holds an ancestral strength. Since the earliest civilizations, bread represented sustenance, life, a link between the sacred and the everyday. By specifically choosing bread for this act, Christ activates a collective memory of food as a divine blessing. But he goes beyond tradition. He transforms bread into a symbol of unity. At that moment, There were no rich or poor, men or women, pure or impure. There were only human beings nourishing themselves from the same act, and this act leveled them not by scarcity, but by shared abundance. The act of breaking bread also holds a hidden spiritual meaning. In sharing food, Christ is teaching that true abundance is not in accumulation, but in allowing the flow to continue. He does not withhold, he does not calculate, he does not limit. In breaking, he interrupts the cycle of fear, possession, separation. He demonstrates that by sharing confidently, the universe responds with multiplication. This is not a metaphor, it's a vibrational law. The gesture of letting go with faith creates space for more to be received, and in this sense, breaking is an act of supreme trust. Another grand aspect of this gesture is the field he creates around himself. In performing this miracle, Christ is surrounded by thousands of people, and yet there is order, there is harmony, there is flow. This is possible because the sacred act does not act in isolation. It creates a collective field. The vibration of Christ at that moment expands like an invisible wave, touching the heart of each person present. Many who ate of that bread did not only feel physical satiety, they felt a peace, a joy, an inner expansion they could not explain. This is because Christ's gesture activated, along with the food, the memory of the divine in each soul. And not only in the miracle of multiplication does this gesture repeat itself. At the Last Supper, the gesture is recreated with even greater depth. Christ again takes the bread, lifts his eyes, gives thanks, breaks it, and offers it. But now he does not merely feed, he offers himself. The bread, once a symbol of sustenance, becomes a symbol of the body. And the act of breaking bread comes to mean, I give myself entirely. In this act, the gesture reaches its peak. It is no longer just external multiplication. It is fusion. It is total surrender. It is sacred sacrifice. In breaking the bread, Christ breaks himself. And in giving, he seals the union between the divine and the human in one field. The act of sharing, therefore, is one of the most complete aspects of the Christ mission. It involves gratitude, faith, detachment, communion, surrender, transcendence. It is both earthly and cosmic at the same time. It is a gesture that touches the senses, but also awakens the spirit. And it remains to this day as one of the most replicated in spiritual rituals around the world. The bread is broken in masses, ceremonies, prayer circles. And whenever this gesture is made with the same intention as Christ, something activates. A field forms, a bridge opens, the gesture echoes. It is also necessary to observe the physical aspect of the gesture. The way Christ held the bread, the serene firmness of his hands, the elevated gaze, the time he devoted to silence before action, all of this composed a frequency. He did not rush. He did not do it out of obligation. Every gesture was a living prayer, a direct dialogue with the source. When he raised the bread to the heavens, he declared, "It is not I who does this. I am merely the channel." And it is precisely this vibrational humility that activated the multiplication. The gesture, when done with purity, does not carry the weight of ego. It is light, because it is in flow with the divine order. Another extraordinary element lies in the people's reaction. Upon receiving the bread, they did not just eat. They looked at him with reverence. They knew they were partaking in something far beyond the physical. Even if they didn't rationally understand, their fields felt it. Christ's gesture had touched a deep layer, dissolved memories of ancestral hunger, undone the fear of scarcity. It was as if, for a brief moment, everyone there had returned to the original garden, where nothing was lacking and everything was shared with love. And the gesture of bread also communicates something about time. It is a gesture that unites past, present, and future. It honors the ancestral tradition of sacred food, manifests abundance in the now, and plants the seed of eternal communion. By repeating this gesture at the Last Supper, Christ eternalizes it. He says, "Do this in remembrance of me," but not as an empty ritual, rather as a call for each gesture to be made with the same spirit, the same surrender, the same awareness, and thus, every table becomes an altar, every bread a sacrament, every sharing, a silent miracle. In times where fear of scarcity dominates the collective mind, this gesture becomes more urgent than ever. Christ shows us that abundance is not in accumulation, but in the act of giving, in trusting, in sharing. He teaches us that the bread that nourishes the body is merely a reflection of the invisible bread that feeds the soul, and that by sharing with faith we multiply not only matter but also light, trust, fraternity. The gesture of the bread is therefore a gesture of remembrance, of who we are, where we came from, and the promise that we will never lack the essentials. When night falls over the Sea of Galilee and the disciples struggle against the waves in a fragile vessel, chaos seems inevitable. The water, an ancient symbol of the unconscious and emotional world, churns violently. Fear, doubt, and despair fill the air. And it is precisely in this setting, where everything seems to crumble, that a gesture breaks the laws of nature and reveals a forgotten truth. The body, when aligned with the spirit, transcends the limits of matter. Christ appears walking on the waters not as a spectacle, but as the pure expression of a consciousness that completely dominates the density of the world. Each step on the rippling surface is a sacred code, an energetic affirmation. The spirit can guide matter. This gesture defies human logic, but it does not violate the divine order. Christ does not float by magic. He does not deny physical reality. He alters his vibration to the point where his body resonates with the subtle structure of water. He does not walk on water in the way we step on the ground. He moves with such lightness of frequency that he becomes part of the field that supports him. This gesture is not just physical, it is vibrational. It represents the elevation of density, the sublimation of flesh, the mastery of the self over the fears that inhabit the collective unconscious. Walking on water is the gesture that reveals what sinks us is not the water, but the vibration we carry when we step on it. The presence of Christ there in the midst of the storm is in itself an act of redemption. He could have waited for the disciples to reach the shore. He could have calmed the waters from a distance. But he chooses to go to them, crossing the abyss between worlds with his own feet. Each step on the waves is a silent teaching. When we are in alignment with the divine, even chaos becomes a path. The body does not sink. Fear does not consume. Doubt does not paralyze. The act of walking on the sea is, therefore, the supreme manifestation of the sovereignty of the incarnate spirit. Christ shows, with his body, what the soul can do when it is not chained to the logic of fear. The disciples, upon seeing him, are frightened. They think they see a ghost. And here, once again, the gesture communicates before the word. Christ does not shout, does not reprimand. He simply keeps walking. The act of maintaining pace, even in the face of misunderstanding, is one of the greatest expressions of divine trust. He does not stop to justify, does not attempt to convince. He just continues, steady, calm, whole. The movement itself is the answer. He is not disturbed by others' doubt, and by acting this way, he creates a field of vibrational coherence that begins to transform fear into faith, confusion into clarity. Pedro, upon seeing him, asks to go to him. Christ does not stop him. He simply says, "Come," not as a challenge, but as an invitation. Pedro steps out of the boat and begins to walk, and for a brief moment, the gesture is replicated. Pedro's body also synchronizes with the higher frequency. But when he looks at the wind, when he remembers the logic, when he succumbs to fear, he sinks. And here is one of the great keys to this gesture. Walking on water is possible as long as the focus is on the origin, on presence, on complete trust. When the gaze shifts to danger, to doubt, to external instability, the vibration drops. The body returns to the weight of matter and the miracle dissolves. Christ extends his hand and holds him. Once again, the gesture saves. He does not accuse, does not reprimand, does not withdraw. He merely touches, lifts, welcomes. The gesture of the outstretched hand in this scene is the bridge between the fall and the return. It is the living expression of mercy. He does not demand explanations. He simply acts with love. And with this touch, Peter returns to the surface, not just of the sea, but of his own faith. Christ's gesture, once again, rescues, heals, restores. There is no speech, only presence and action. This moment reveals that the right gesture, made at the right time, can return someone to their own connection with the divine. The symbolism of the sea in this context is vast. The water represents emotions, inner abysses, and the primal fears of humanity. Christ walking on it is the gesture that announces, it is possible to conquer what once consumed us. It is possible to cross what once paralyzed us. The body, when elevated by the Spirit, does not fear the abyss. It transforms it into a road. And this is not just about Christ. It is about what is available to every human being who chooses to elevate their frequency, align their intention, and move with confidence. The gesture is universal. The code is open. The lesson is eternal. It is also essential to realize that Christ performs this act in the middle of the night, amidst a raging storm. This reinforces the teaching. It is not necessary to wait for calm to move with faith. It is not necessary for everything to be resolved to act with courage. The act of walking in the dark, amidst chaos, is the act of true mastery. Christ shows us that it is not about waiting for ideal conditions. It is about being the condition. He is the peace amidst the storm, the firmness amidst fluidity, the act that transforms the impossible into the inevitable. The return to the boat seals this cycle. When Christ enters the vessel, the wind ceases. The presence of the resolute gesture calms the environment. And this shows us another profound aspect. When a being walks consciously over its own abysses, it transforms the collective field. The peace that he carries within himself radiates around. The gesture, even when made by one, reverberates in all. The storm ceases not because the weather changes, but because the present vibration no longer allows chaos. Christ does not merely walk, he restructures reality with his steps. Each movement over the water reorders the elements. This gesture, despite being grand, is not meant to impress. Christ does not repeat it, nor does he flaunt it. He simply does it and moves on, because the gesture is not meant to draw attention, but to teach. And the lesson is clear. It is indeed possible to transcend apparent limits. It is indeed possible to walk on what used to sink us, but this requires an inner stance of unshakable faith, of total presence, of absolute surrender. The body then becomes light, and light does not sink. It shines, it guides, it transforms. This is the gesture that remains alive for all those who wish to cross their internal seas with confidence and grace. Walking on water was not just a miracle of Christ, it was a teaching in motion, a reminder that the body, when attuned to the divine, becomes an instrument of transcendence, a gesture that, even after 2,000 years, continues to echo as an invitation, not to challenge the laws of nature, but to reveal the true nature of the Spirit, and the one who understands this gesture and aligns with its frequency will discover that the impossible is merely a frequency not yet accessed. As Christ's earthly cycle nears its climax, the actions he performs take on even greater depth and symbolism. However, none of them carry as much intensity of love and hidden teaching as the act of washing his disciples' feet. A gesture simple to human sight, but absolutely revolutionary in its spiritual essence. He, the Master, the Son of the Most High, bending before those who followed him, not as a distant authority, but as a radical servant. In this act, Christ breaks with all hierarchical structure of the world and reveals true power, that which manifests in humility, surrender, and love that becomes action. The scene is silent. Christ rises from the table, removes his robe, takes a towel, wraps it around his waist, pours water into a basin, and begins to wash the feet of each disciple. The basin, the towel, the water, the hands, everything is symbolic. He strips himself of status, of the place of speech, of social expectation, to place himself at the lowest level in the eyes of the world. But it is precisely here that the highest gesture of the Christ mission resides. He touches the feet, the lowest part of the body, the most exposed to the dirt of the road, to the hardness of the world. And by doing this, he communicates something that no sermon could express. There is nothing unworthy of being touched by love. This gesture is even more impressive when we understand the context. It was the Last Supper. Christ knew what was coming: the betrayal, the arrest, the trial, the cross. And yet, he chose that moment to teach, not with words, but with his body. He knew time was short, that the disciples would carry on the mission. So, he gives them a gesture that would remain imprinted not only in their memory, but in the vibrational field of each one. The gesture of bowing, of service, of surrender, not as submission, but as absolute sovereignty. He does not bow because he is weak, he bows because he is invincible. Pedro, upon seeing him approach with the basin, resists. "You will never wash my feet," he says, unable to understand what was happening. But Christ responds with firmness and sweetness. "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." This moment reveals that the gesture is more than a physical act of cleaning. It's a rite of passage, a seal of alliance, a spiritual code that activates deep communion between the master and the disciple. Pedro, faced with this revelation, changes his stance. "Then, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." The initial resistance transforms into total surrender, and Christ's gesture fulfills its function to transform the heart of the one who receives it. The washing of the feet also symbolizes forgiveness. The feet, which have walked along winding paths, which have strayed off course, which have fled and returned, are touched with water and affection. The gesture purifies not just the flesh, but the journey. Christ, in washing the feet, does not erase the past. He redeems it. He says without words, "I know where you have been, and yet I welcome you." This breaks the guilt, dissolves the shame, restores the dignity. The Master's gesture bends the pride and lifts the spirit. He redefines the value of the body, the meaning of purity, the role of touch. There's also a detail that eludes the superficial eye. Christ washed the feet of all, including those of Judas. Knowing of the betrayal that was to come, he doesn't hesitate, doesn't retreat, doesn't omit. He washes the feet of the one who would soon betray him. This is the point where the gesture reaches its most sublime expression. There is no exclusion. There is no separation. Love is offered even to the one who chooses the path of darkness. Christ's gesture communicates that love is not conditional, that service is universal, that the act of healing and acceptance doesn't wait for merit. It is given simply because it can be given. And when the gesture ends, he returns to the table. He puts on his robe again and looks into everyone's eyes. "Did you understand what I did for you? I, the Lord and Master, washed your feet. You should wash each other's feet." Here the gesture becomes a legacy. It is not an isolated act, it is a call for continuity. Christ says with clarity and firmness, "Do the same." Not just repeat the gesture externally, but embody its essence. Be channels of service, of humility, of active love. Make your body a living altar, where each gesture is an expression of the Spirit. This gesture also carries a memory from the beginning. When Christ washed the disciples' feet, he was preparing them for the path that would come. Just like in baptism, where water marked the start of the public mission, here water seals the preparation for the new mission, the expansion of the kingdom through them. The gesture is circular. It starts with water, ends with water. And in both cases, the body is the instrument. The gesture washes, purifies, activates. It marks a before and an after. There's no way to remain the same after being touched by this silent surrender. The body language at this moment is revealing. Christ kneels, leans down, touches lightly, pours water, dries with a towel. Each movement is made with full attention, with reverence. He does not rush, he does not perform, he consecrates. His whole body is present. The gesture is total, and by wrapping the feet with his hands, he closes an energy circuit. It's as if he's saying, "Now you can walk at a new frequency. Now you are free to proceed without guilt, without fear, without burden." The gesture not only unlocks the feet, but the destiny. In the deepest symbolism, washing the feet is aligning the body with the earth. The feet are the points of contact with the ground, with the path, with everyday reality. By purifying them, Christ aligns the disciples with the new journey. The gesture anchors them in the purpose. The mission now pulses in the feet, in the body, in the steps. And by doing this with his own hands, Christ seals the integration between the human and the divine. The gesture unites heaven and earth. It unites master and disciple. It unites surrender and mission. This gesture did not end on that night. It continues to be replicated in rituals, in ceremonies, but above all in invisible actions. Every time someone bends down to serve, every time someone chooses to love despite the pain, every time pride is set aside so that the other can be welcomed, this gesture manifests itself again. The body becomes a channel, the action becomes a prayer, the gesture becomes presence. And this presence, like on that silent night, changes everything. No other moment in Christ's mission carries as much spiritual, energetic, and symbolic density as the one in which he, without resistance, allows his body to be suspended on the cross. The crucifixion was not just a tragic episode of violence, it was a cosmic gesture of alignment. The way Christ positions his body on the cross is not accidental, nor imposed without consciousness. Every detail, from the outstretched arms to the inclined head, forms a vibrational seal. The cross, which for many represented humiliation and death, became through this gesture a gateway, a symbol of transmutation, and a map of the alignment between heaven, earth, and the four cardinal points of creation. Christ, by placing himself there, was not defeated. He revealed himself. The gesture of opening one's arms and offering oneself fully to the flow of fate is the most radical act of surrender ever witnessed. He does not struggle, does not scream, does not curse. He surrenders. He accepts. He gives himself over to the absolute gesture, the body stretched out, without resistance, in a posture that encompasses all of humanity. The open arms symbolize universal acceptance. He does not clench his fists, does not cross his arms, does not protect himself. He exposes himself, and it is precisely in this total exposure that redemption is activated. The gesture says, "Nothing in me is hidden. Everything in me is light." The crucified body is the transfigured body. It is the temple that opens to reveal the spirit. In the esoteric tradition, the cross is seen as the intersection of planes. The vertical represents the divine descending. The horizontal represents the human extending. Christ, when placed in this position, becomes the point of union between these two axes. He becomes the center of the world, the axis mundi, the point where time touches eternity, and more than being trapped there, he merges with this structure. His gesture of immobility is, paradoxically, the gesture of his supreme freedom. For there, where there is no more escape, where the body is surrendered to the extreme of pain, his consciousness reaches the peak of expansion. He transcends. The blood that drips from his hands, his feet, his forehead is not merely pain, it's liberation. Each drop is a key that dissolves old packs of fear, guilt, limitation. The open wound on his side is a passage. It's a tear in the veil, and the act of the bleeding body is not the end, it's the beginning. Christ does not die on the cross. He expands, he spreads, he inscribes himself into the collective consciousness of humanity as an eternal gesture. His death is the multiplication of the Spirit. The body that breaks on the cross is the same body that, like bread, will be shared throughout all times, in all hearts. The head of Christ, tilted, is not fallen in defeat. It rests in reverence. The tilt of the face to the side is the gesture of the final surrender. It's as if he's saying, "It is finished." Now the body returns to the earth, and the spirit to the Father. This final gesture seals everything. He didn't need a speech. His body spoke. Every tense muscle, every exposed bone, every difficult breath, every prolonged silence. Everything was language. Everything was prayer. Everything was gesture. And by tilting his head, he closes the cycle of incarnation with dignity, beauty, and transcendence. The soldiers, when they look at him, do not see just an agonizing body. They feel something change in the air. The atmosphere transforms. The sky darkens. The earth trembles. The temple veil tears. These are signs of the vibrational repercussion of the act. The crucifixion was a cosmic reconfiguration. The death of the body activated a new field on the planet. The gesture of the cross became a spiritual antenna that continues to emit light 2,000 years later. The position of Christ's body, as if embracing the world, remains alive in the collective psyche as the ultimate symbol of love. And furthermore, the body of Christ, suspended between heaven and earth, is perfectly aligned with the four elements. The wood of the cross, earth; the spilled blood, water; the lack of air in the lungs, air; and the heat of pain transmuted into compassion, fire. The gesture unites everything. He becomes the fifth element, the ether, the consciousness that integrates the opposites. The cross was not a defeat, it was a rite, it was alchemy. The body was the crucible, the gesture was the transmutation, and the consciousness of Christ was the fire that purified everything. Beside him, two other men are also crucified, but only one understands the magnitude of the act. "Remember me when you enter your kingdom," says the repentant thief. Christ, even in pain, responds with gesture and word. "Today you will be with me in paradise." Here the gesture expands. Even on the cross, even in agony, he continues to open portals. He continues to offer passage, because Christ's gesture on the cross is not closure, it's openness. The cross is the gate, the body is the key, the gesture is the password. The women who accompany him, especially Mary, his mother, do not only see the suffering, they see the complete gesture. They understand the silence, the posture, the energy that flows. Mary, there, standing, does not faint, does not despair, she remains. Her gesture is also sacred. The mother who watches her sons surrender without resistance, supporting with her gaze what many would not understand. The pain there is transfigured by understanding. Christ's gesture, observed by loving eyes, becomes even more powerful. He is not alone, he is being witnessed, and this testimony ensures that the gesture remains alive. In the invisible plane, legions of consciousnesses witness the gesture. The body of Christ, in that position, sends signals to all planes. It's not just a sacrifice, it's a communication, a message, an activation. And this activation remains available. The cross of Christ is in the heart of everyone who decides to surrender to the flow, to the purpose, to the truth. Whenever someone chooses to open their arms to life, instead of closing themselves in fear, the gesture is repeated. Whenever someone forgives instead of seeking revenge, welcomes instead of excluding, surrenders instead of resisting, the gesture of the cross manifests itself again. This is the power of an absolute gesture. It does not end. It vibrates. It echoes. It remains. The cross, with all its weight and glory, is the point where the body became a symbol. The symbol became a portal, and the portal became a path. Christ taught us with his extended body that the end is the beginning, that the act of surrender is not death, it is birth on another frequency. And when we align ourselves with this gesture, we too can be channels of passage, bridges between worlds, instruments of light. At the dawn of the third day, when the sky still wavered between shadows and light, a silent gesture shattered the veils of time and death. Christ, hitherto surrendered to the rest of the flesh, rose not with the body limited by the density of the earth, but with the glorified body, luminous, vibrating at another frequency. The resurrection was not just a victory over death, but a complete transfiguration of form. And with this, a new gesture was inscribed in the human field, the gesture of full presence without the need for dense matter, the manifestation of the being that crosses walls, that appears the instant it is felt, that communicates with the vibration even before the word. Christ's body now does not bend to gravity, it dances with eternity. Christ's first act after resurrection isn't grandiose, isn't theatrical, isn't a public display of power. He chooses to appear to Mary Magdalene, a woman of faith and pure love. And what does he do? He calls her by her name. He doesn't raise his hand, doesn't create lights around, he just calls her tenderly. Mary. This gesture, so simple and profound, is one of the most sacred. It is the gesture of spiritual intimacy, He reveals himself to those who truly love him, and her response, laden with emotion and reverence, triggers something invisible in the space. The confirmation that his presence continues, now even fuller, subtler, more powerful. Maria approaches, perhaps instinctively wanting to touch him, but he says, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." This gesture of distancing is not rejection, it is teaching. Christ is showing that his presence is no longer held by physical contact. The gesture of the body is now different. He is field, he is consciousness, he is vibration. Touching his glorified body is no longer a matter of hands, it's about internal alignment. The new gesture requires a different kind of perception. It's no longer about seeing with the eyes or touching with the skin, but feeling with the spirit. Over the next 40 days, Christ appears at different times, in different places, but always with a transformative gesture. He passes through closed doors, appears among the disciples without warning, breaks bread with ease. In each of these moments, his presence is not invasive, but revealing. He doesn't force recognition, he allows the awakening. The gesture of the resurrected Christ is the gesture of absolute subtlety. He no longer walks, he manifests. He no longer touches with hands, he touches with light. And this new way of being inaugurates an era, that of the presence that does not depend on form. A particularly striking gesture occurs when he enters the upper room where the disciples are gathered. They are scared, locked in, fearing the same tormentors, and Christ appears there, among them, without opening doors, without warning, and he says, "Peace be with you." This gesture is monumental. He does not bring vengeance, does not demand justice, does not cry out for glory. He offers peace. The glorified body manifests itself to heal, not to confront. And more, he breathes on them. Receive the Holy Spirit. Here, the gesture reaches the highest level of integration between body and spirit. Christ's breath is the gesture that transfers creative energy. He does not just inspire the disciples, he activates them. He tunes them into the new frequency. The gesture of breath recalls the beginning of creation. In Genesis, God breathes the breath of life into Adam. Now, Christ breathes the Spirit onto the new humanity. It is a reset. It is the confirmation that a new earth begins not with the change of the environment, but with the transformation of human vibration. Christ's body, now glorified, is the model of the new body of humanity. He shows what is possible when the Spirit reigns over form, and the gestures he performs after the resurrection are no longer gestures to heal, they are gestures to empower. He no longer heals the sick, he awakens the masters. Another sublime gesture occurs on the road to Emmaus. Two disciples walk, sad, confused, not recognizing that the one accompanying them is Christ himself. It is only in the breaking of the bread, in the repetition of that sacred gesture, that their eyes are opened, and in the next instant, he disappears. Here lies the power of the gesture crystallized in the field. The repetition of the bread's gesture, now made with the glorified body, activates the deepest memory. They do not recognize him by appearance, but by the gesture. The gesture transcends time. The gesture is the real identity. It is the seal of the Spirit. In breaking the bread, he breaks the veil of illusion. On the hill of Galilee, he performs the last great bodily gesture before the ascension. He raises his arms and blesses the disciples. This simple gesture carries the totality of his teachings. The hands extended to the sky, blessing those who will carry on, form a field of direct transfer. The blessing is energy. The raising of the hands is a living antenna. Christ is saying, with this gesture, "What I did, you will do, and you will do even more." He is not just saying goodbye, he is activating. He is transferring. He confirms that the light that once manifested through him will now be reflected by all those who understand and incorporate this new way of being. The ascension is the final act of this earthly journey, but it is not an act of escape, it is an act of liberation. He does not absent himself, he diffuses into the field. He does not rise to leave, he expands to be in everything. The image of the body rising to the heavens is the symbol of consciousness that transcends the cycle. The body of Christ does not disappear, it becomes omnipresent. And this final act seals the promise: I will be with you always, to the end of the age. The glorified body, now in full light, no longer needs to be seen. It can be felt, accessed, invoked by those who vibrate at the same frequency. The new gesture, therefore, is internal. It's silent. It's expansive. It happens when someone prays in truth, when someone chooses love, when someone forgives the unforgivable, when someone sees God in another. Every small gesture of compassion, of presence, of surrender is now a manifestation of the resurrected Christ, because his gesture planted a seed, and this seed sprouts within each awakened soul. He no longer needs to touch with his hands. He touches with intention. He no longer needs to walk with his feet. He walks with those who have chosen to be the way. And the most magnificent thing is that this glorified act is not reserved for a select few. It is the living promise that every being, on their own path of transformation, can also don the body of light. Christ did not come just to show what he was capable of doing. He came to reveal what we are capable of becoming. The act of resurrection was not the end. It was the beginning of enlightened humanity. And every conscious action we take today, every choice aligned with love, is a step towards that glorious body waiting to be awakened within us. This is the gesture of the new earth, the divine presence embodied in conscious bodies, in small and powerful gestures, in healing glances, in words that liberate, in silences that welcome. The glorified body of Christ did not only ascend to the heavens, it entered the heart of the world. And it continues, even today, manifesting itself in every gesture of light that pierces the darkness. Because he lives, and lives in every gesture we make with love. And now that you've come this far, mind unfettered, tell me, which of these sacred gestures touched your soul the most today? Which movement of Christ do you feel you are being called to embody in your own journey? Share with us in the comments. You don't need to write much, just a gesture, a perception, a vibration. This exchange creates a powerful field between us. And when many comment with intention, we activate the portal of conscious manifestation together. Yes, each comment carries a frequency, and here, in this space, your voice is a link in the collective awakening. And if this video has opened up new perspectives for you, then you need to continue with the next key that is waiting for you right there on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. It is there that we reveal the hidden steps left by Christ, a real spiritual map for enlightenment step by step. Click now, take a deep breath, and come with me to take the next step of this sacred journey. We are the mind unfettered, free in mind, awakened in spirit, and this path is just beginning.